Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, my privilege.
So, you know, your state is interesting. I love North Carolina. I love now I'm on several radio stations there now. And it's this growing state where Charlotte is becoming this financial rival to Atlanta. And there's been this perception that, oh, it's becoming this blue state. It's voted for Democrats. Maybe it's a swing state. You've got the supermajority Republican legislature now, a governor who seems clueless on cultural issues, let alone economic issues of the state. And you want to be governor of that?
Absolutely. Yes. We're living in a day and age where we have to charge the hill and do everything we can. And there are signs of positivity of it continuing to move red. I'll give you one quick example. In 2022, North Carolina won unaffiliated by 9%. What that allowed us to do is we swept all 6 statewide judicial races, 4 Court of Appeals, 2 Supreme Court justices that flipped back the North Carolina Supreme Court from Democrat to Republican. Those are huge races. We're seeing it trend. You are correct. We've only had 1 Republican governor elected in the last 31 years in North Carolina, but we think that's going to change in 2024.
Good. Now, I want to step back a little bit because you were in Congress. You were one of the reliable conservative votes in Congress. And I have gotten a sense from the few conversations we've had in the past that you had some frustrations, not just with Republican leadership, but with some of the folks who went to Congress, said they were conservative, but were so willing to cut a deal. We're at $32 trillion in national debt.
No question. That's why I didn't support the omnibus. I'm the highest rated conservative to ever serve in the top 4 leadership positions in the history of the United States Congress, and the last member to get a balanced budget back in 2018, negotiated that with Speaker Ryan. Here's the interesting thing to make your point. When we got that to the floor, I think we had 239 Republicans present that day. Only 160 Republicans voted for it. That's what we're talking about. There's a lot of campaign commercials about fiscal responsibility, a lot of campaigns that are built on making sure that we're cutting that bottom line. But going there and living it out or doing it is 2 different things. When we look at people, whether they're statewide elections or whether it's in the United States Congress, House, or Senate, we want to make sure that's a topic that's very important, because I know it's not the sexy topic. We're talking about all the social issues. Those are important. But if you look at the amount of debt that we're accumulating, it's not just the fact of what kind of burden we're leaving for our children and grandchildren, but we've also reached a place, Eric, where it's a national security issue as well.
Now, let's look at the governor's race for just a minute, because you mentioned how few Republican governors have gotten elected, despite a good Republican success in North Carolina. I still consider it more of a red state than a blue state.
Yes.
But there just seems to be this fundamental dynamic where you have folks who get the nominations for the Republican Party who tend to crash and burn. And I never like to ask candidates about their opponents. And I do like the primary opponent you're running against, but there are issues there that I think, much like we saw with the Herschel Walker race in Georgia, it's easy to win a primary on the enthusiasm of a crowd, and then you can see the plane crash coming.
Yes.
And I worry about that in North Carolina if the voters don't get it right in the primary.
It's a valid concern, and people get after you sometimes for pointing some of this out. But my job is to make sure that the Attorney General in North Carolina, who's a Democrat, more of a Gavin Newsom family tree, if you will, his name's Josh Stein. Our current governor's term limited. He's served 2 terms, a Democrat. My job is to make sure he never sees the light of day. He's a card-carrying, progressive, radical wingnut, for lack of better expression. I think we understand what wingnuts are. But as far as the primary opponent, it's very similar to Herschel Walker. We have a guy who has a background of 4 bankruptcies, just to get into the place of it, multiple foreclosures and evictions, civil judgments, tax liens. If you do not think the Democrats are going to use that as fodder, they will. And I think at some point in this cone that we're in, Republicans are going to have to ask themselves the question, does character and integrity still matter to our party? Because we've gotten to the place, Look, and you and I are both, I was a pastor for 16 years before running for Congress. God's grace is sufficient. I know I need it on a daily basis. But when we're looking at a situation, North Carolina, Republicans make up only 30% of the registered voters. You have to have unaffiliated support to be able to get across the finish line. And when you've alienated the groups, or when your background, past and present, doesn't match what you're spewing from the stage, eventually it is revealed. And that's why when we look for candidates, in my opinion, you have to have people that not just can give the great speech, but have a history of substance that matches what they're speaking about. The hypocrisy is going to turn many, many people away. And here's the one other point I want to make on this, Eric. All of us can talk about the problems. Man, there's a slew of them. I was the ranking member on intelligence and counterterrorism, been to the border. Joe Biden, we could talk about him and Hunter and the problems for days. But here's where the Republicans and Democrats are different, and here's where the Democrats are beating us. We like to talk about the issues. Democrats are coming up with solutions. We like to talk about the problems. Democrats are putting forth results. Republicans are reactive. Democrats are proactive. And until we start looking for candidates that have a plan, that have solutions, that have a game plan to win, we're going to continue on this proverbial hamster wheel in our echo chambers talking about the issues, which are important, but we've got to find a way to move to the transition of finding the solutions. So a great speech or a candidate that looks good on paper, you have to look a little deeper sometimes.
It's well said. Wild card question for you, having been a pastor, the politics, which is worse, in the church or in Congress?
Well, as a former Southern Baptist pastor, people ask me sometime, I got to Congress, second week I'm there, my chief of staff comes with an article. He said, boss, I don't know how to tell you this, but you're ranked the least wealthy member of the 114th class. Okay, well, that's fine. I was a pastor for 16 years. But then people asked me, later on that year, I became the first member ever after one term to be elected to the largest caucus, the Republican Study Committee, got chairman there. We were going to do some great policy things, but people asked me, they said, Congressman, how did you hit the ground running so quickly? Now, I don't always share it, but in my heart, I'm thinking, man, if you can survive a Baptist business meeting, you can go have success anywhere. so it's a little secret there, exactly. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Presbyterians, ask a Baptist, they'll explain it to you. So.
But you know, in that regard, that's how we connected. Is the Republican Study Committee had been, I mean, Mike Pence was the chairman of it, Jeb Hensarling. It was where the Republican conservatives were. Yeah. And so many non-conservatives joined to say, well, I'm a member of the study committee. Right. And over time, it was one of the reasons that led to the House Freedom Caucus to a degree, is because it just kind of became a way for the leadership to stamp conservatives like this, Republican Study Committee, and you really worked to bring the Republican Study Committee back as conservative first, not Republican first.
Yeah, yes, no, I'm very, very proud of that record to make sure that we weren't just rubber stamping. Not that we were intentionally looking to be adversary, and we always wanted to have, as we talked about, a plan or solution. But I remember getting elected at the end of my first term, November, it's 2016, same month that President Trump and Vice President Pence gets elected. After inauguration, I pick up the phone, and because I could now, and I called Vice President. I said, Vice President Pence, if you'll co-host the meetings with me, we'll do two things that Republicans have been promising for 7 years. He said, what's that? I said, we'll repeal Obamacare and we'll defund Planned Parenthood. He said, Mark, I'm in. Over the next maybe 6 to 7 weeks, got 40 members in the room, members of the Committees of Jurisdiction, Freedom Caucus, RSC, all the different groups, and we laid out a plan. I remember getting a call late one Thursday evening, still in my office about 10 o'clock. It was the White House. They say, we think this thing is done. Can you bring your executive team over in the morning? Now, I had never been to the Oval Office. My first 2 years were President Obama's last 2 years, and he didn't ask to hang out a whole lot for some reason. But I got over there, got a dozen guys. We're in the Oval Office. Vice President Pence greets me, sits me next to President Trump, explained it to him. We shake hands. He brings the press in. In that moment, we had repealed Obamacare and defunded Planned Parenthood. And I remember walking out of the White House that day thinking, man, I'm just a small town preacher's kid, but in America, you can go all the way to Congress, even here in the Oval Office, and do what you promised the people that you would do. It was a neat moment there, but that's the kind of proactive that I'm talking about when it looks to not just the process. No offense to my attorney friends who get stuck in that process sometimes. Well, how do we get to point A to point B, whether it's the federal government or the state government? And I think that takes a great deal of intentionality.
The dynamics in North Carolina to me are so interesting. I'll tell you the story. I've said this on radio before. When I got hired by CNN back in 2009, before I went to Fox, Fox was looking at me at the time. And I went into Bill Shine's office at Fox, who's become a friend, And he said, let me explain to you why Fox is dominant. He pulled out, clearly he had done this a million times. He had these blank maps of the U.S. He drew these ovals down the coast, and then he put a little circle in North Carolina. And he said, Fox covers the entire heartland. CNN and MSNBC only cover the coast. MSNBC is dominant, and he put his finger in North Carolina and said, because they also get the college towns. And he was pointing at the Raleigh-Durham area. You have this hub of progressivism in the Raleigh-Durham area, UNC, Duke. You have this financial center in Charlotte, but then you have this broad and beautiful expanse of mountain, and we can't forget the hippies in Asheville, but you have this broad, beautiful expanse.
They forget a lot, but yes, we can't forget about it. Yes, exactly right. So yes, yeah.
Rural state and the beautiful coastline in North Carolina. Of course, you got Kitty Hawk and it all. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous state.
Yes.
But these incredible divides that I think are increasingly, you see it in the polling, the urban, well-to-do, secular, highly educated, and then the farmers and the people who've chosen to move into rural North Carolina who constantly are encroached by the city. How do you balance the dynamics of that?
You take your message to these places. I'm very proud, as strong as of a conservative background we have, I'm the only conservative, the only Republican in North Carolina in the history to win the United Negro College President's Award. I'm the only Republican in the state of North Carolina that's given the commencement address at HBCU. 3 months ago, I'm teaching the entrepreneurial class at the largest black college in the country. Well, why is that important? See, the reason why it's important is because unless we take the message of individualism, liberty, these conservative values to these different places and communities and college campuses, they're not going to hear it. So it's all well and good to get around a bunch of conservatives and understand what we're trying to do, but we've got it. We can't stop there. One of the great fulfilling things, in fact, Eric, if I had to pinpoint it, what motivated me to launch for governor on May the 20th is God has given us an opportunity, some favor to go to places where Republicans don't normally go. I'm very proud to go there. Those relationships are genuine. And when we go in and we talk about why America is the land of opportunity, when you see young people in different communities, 22, 23 years old, when it's the first time that they've ever heard that in America you can be anything that you want to be. I was teaching a class, as I mentioned the other day, and we were talking about business startups, some entrepreneurship things with my background in finance before I became a pastor. And it wasn't long before we shifted the conversation to the victimization culture. And I told them, I said, look, here's what the psalmist wrote. The psalmist 139, in Psalms 139 said, you're fearfully and wonderfully made. In fact, Jeremiah says that God knew you when you were in your mother's womb, which means this. He has a very unique, specific purpose and plan for your life. He's given you certain talents and gifts. Do not let the left, these elitists come in and tell you this is your ceiling, because God has a completely different plan for you. Now, to see that resonate, not that you flip an entire room, but can you imagine being a young adult and never hearing that before, that America is not inherently racist, it's not inherently evil, not saying that we got it all right day one, but no country can match this as the land of opportunity for every community. I'm driven to share that, and I'm going to go to places where Republicans don't normally go, and I pray that God continues to give us that opportunity.
That's good. That's good. Okay, so I got to get into this. I do want you to be able to tell the crowd, because you do have this background in finance before you went into ministry, before you got into politics. Your biography is actually one that I think is really unique.
Well, I grew up as a Baptist preacher's kid, oldest of 3 boys. So we were either at school, church, or on the ball field. That's only 3 options. We couldn't go anywhere else. No theaters, no dances. You know, my mom to this day, she sees me on Fox News or something. She says she'll call and say it's time to get a haircut. You know, so those kind of moms. So yeah. But I grew up in that environment. I wanted no part of it, so I pursued. I played 2 or 3 sports in college for 1 year. Then I realized how good everybody else was. So it was kind of time to change the priorities. But I worked in business and finance for about 6 or 7 years. And then I did something I swore I would never do, and that would be to follow my dad's footsteps as a pastor. Stepped away from ministry, sold our home. We rented an old Sears and Roebuck catalog prefabricated house, built like, I don't know if you remember these things, 1915, 1920. You could hear the wind whistle blew it at night. Times were tough, went back to school. My wife is a wonderful human being. She's a family nurse practitioner. And many of her years, she was on the Wake Forest Baptist University helicopter, their air care system. Wonderful, could take 30 minutes just talking about her. But we decided to be obedient, prayed about it, and served 16 years as a pastor. I cut my teeth with Dr. Gary and Carolyn Chapman. He wrote the 5 Love Languages. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. But it was just a wonderful opportunity to serve. We worked in the inner cities, Cleveland, New York, Baltimore, served in refugee camps. And it really gave me an understanding and a passion of the different cultures, the different things that we have to do as believers, but also as conservatives as far as how we bridge that gap. And it was that, I think those unique opportunities and experiences that kind of crafted the idea. In 2013, I literally remember getting up out of the living room, watching something politically that didn't go the conservative way. I walked down the hallway into the bedroom, and I told my wife, she was back there working, kind of stuck my chest out, said, "Babe, I'm running for the United States Congress." Now, I don't know if Christy asks you good questions like my wife Kelly does, but she says, "Do you know anybody in Raleigh, much less Washington, D.C.?" I got to think, I said, "No, I probably should." But we stepped out by faith, and God provided, and we ran in 2014, had to take on the most powerful Republican family in North Carolina. We were completely ignorant of the process. But it was just a moment to test our faith, to do what we felt like the Lord was leading us to do. And again, He opened up the opportunities to go. And I remember getting there. Nobody expected us to be there. Nobody even knew who we were. But I discovered something quite unique in the process. And I would love to say it was all out of nobility, but it was more just accidental. As I used to think that we send people to Congress or House or Senate sometimes and then they turn. What I realized, a lot of that refining process actually happens on the campaign trail. When you have different groups and people that want to come and partner and support you, you then have to pay them back once you get to Congress. We were able to stay free and clear of that, and it allowed us, I think, to expedite our ability to engage the process.
In engaging the process, you get to Congress, and you are, I remember the story, I mean, you're at the bottom of the list in terms of income and wealth, and sure. You suddenly you go into this room, some of whom are their political legacies. Yes. And it was one of the interesting things to me, you getting to rise to the Republican Study Committee when you think about the people who had been there and done that, and many of them even going back to Pence and Insuling had been there for a decade or so before they get there. I mean, what do you think led so many of these people who had been there for so long to say, you know what, this is the guy who should revitalize this group?
Oh, goodness gracious. I don't know that I can explain all of what they were thinking. I hope that in those first 2 years, we showed the ability to build coalitions without compromise. And I think that was one of the ways that we were able to do that, to rally in those first 2 years. We were the first member of the 114th class to pass legislation, anti-human trafficking law. We literally had our team in place. We were structured, we were organized, and we were intentional. And I think that was one of the ways that even as a freshman and swearing in January 2015, we were able to get out of the gate quick. And just trying to be a quick study to learn, because you never know how many opportunities that you have to serve. We're not promised of anything. In fact, at the end of my 3rd term, I woke up one day and I had been redistricted in what's called a D19, pretty much a Democratic seat. So we wanted to squeeze every much of life out of that we could, in the context that when we did return home, we had something to show for it, not from a being patted on the back, but just knowing that we made the most of our time.
Now, if you were to get elected governor of North Carolina, I know we've got people from North Carolina here. How does a Walker administration immediately look differently from what they have in terms of the policies you would pursue?
Well, I think the number one thing on our list is, in North Carolina, we've got to protect our children and families. When I first got to Congress, the Democrats were still trying to sneak things in the back door, all the different things being very cunning. That has changed in 8 years. Now it's in your face. We're going to steamroll you, try and stop us. And I hope that that new boldness is waking up conservatives in middle America, if you will, to the place that they're willing to engage. Our children are our most precious treasure. But the fact that they're not even, this evil, I'm going to call it that what it is, this evil that's targeting our children, they're not trying to hide it anymore, Eric, as you know. They're intentional with it. So as governor, one of the things that we're going to push back after the last 8 years of Democratic rule is we're going to make sure that we're going to protect our children. Underneath that, there are some economic issues. Education is a huge thing. I think all the things that we talk about, they're important, but until we reform our education, we're just treating the symptoms. Because what we're doing is we're producing 40, 50 years of people that believe America is a bad country. Once they become adults, it's hard to shift that. And until you get to the very core and begin to give these parents and allowing the money to follow the student as opposed to the system, that is what we have to do to bring about the real change.
I want to talk about economics for real quick, because when you look at this state, you look at South Carolina, even to a degree, you look at Tennessee, or around North Carolina, you've got Amazon looking at Tennessee.
Sure.
You've got Boeing and BMW expanding, and Mercedes in South Carolina and Georgia, a lot of massive investment. And I know there's some, and you've got this massive finance sector in Charlotte, but it does seem that under the Cooper administration, a lot of big companies that are looking at the South, you would think North Carolina makes sense given the education at Duke and UNC, North Carolina State, and it seems like a lot of companies are actually still not choosing to land business there.
Well, Nikki Haley did whip our tail when she was governor of South Carolina a couple times. I have to give her a tip of the hat of that. But no, North Carolina, we were only behind Florida and Texas as far as what we're calling an American migration. 124,000 people moved to North Carolina just last year. We're second in the country when it comes to paved roads, but number 22 in port size. So when you're recruiting manufacturers, started getting to the wonky business side here, but when you're recruiting manufacturers, it's not just about what they can import, but it's also about what they can export. That's a huge part of it. So you have to have somebody with a little business background that could go into these boardrooms and recruit. But you are correct. Alabama, I would put them in there as well as far as recruiting some of the businesses. We're on the precipice. We've got a huge, Toyota's got a battery plant that's coming in our area. Wolfspeed's coming in. That's a $4 billion investment. We're on the precipice of really seeing some neat things. But you're correct. You know North Carolina well. Charlotte's been the fintech area. The biotech has been more of the research triangle. Where I live in the triad, we're trying to see if it can become the aerotech. But you have to be aggressive without compromising or giving away the farm. And that's what I think we can bring as governor of North Carolina.
I was going to make a crack about the ACC and the SEC in North Carolina, but
Go ahead.
Had enough references, but a basketball state more than a football state, I guess we'll say. I am fascinated by the dynamic. I got a scholarship to go to Duke, and I wound up not going there. But even then, in the 1990s, it very much struck me as this beautiful campus and this beautiful place. They wanted me to know that I needed them; they didn't need me. Sure. And it wasn't this warm being from a very rural part of Louisiana to go. But yet, ever since then, my kid has gotten recruitment material from some of the colleges in North Carolina. And I'm really stunned by even in the recruitment. I mean, they want to make sure you know how woke and progressive some of these universities are. Are you concerned about that push from those institutions being so big that they fundamentally do change the culture of North Carolina?
Well, they've been changing the culture in North Carolina across the country. How many times have you talked with people who've sent their freshman daughter or son to one of these campuses, and by Christmas time, they don't even recognize them? But once again, that's talking about the problem. What's the solution? As governor of North Carolina, I'm directly targeting tenureship. Until we're willing to go after, take away that tenureship, and even take the chance to fire some of these professors, we're not going to solve it. As long as you have no accountability in those positions, we're not going to change that. And that's where a lot of the indoctrination, that's where a lot of the damage is done to those young adults, because you have, 93% of all faculty is either left or hard left. You've got 7% that are considered moderate or conservatives. That's fine. But if you cross those lines, I'm going to put tenureship in play as the next governor.
Good for you. So, I just got to say as an aside that you make this somewhat more challenging for me, because I'm used to throwing a question and standard politician goes on for 10 minutes and I can just sit over here and twiddle my thumbs, and you're actually giving me these answers with some precision. So let me talk to you about something else where I know you can give me some precision.
Sure.
And that is, you and I both share this belief that we do have a spiritual problem in the country. And part of the fundamental problem, as I see it, is our political class that could try with the rhetoric to elevate our souls are instead using those spiritual problems to divide us further.
Yes.
as you run for office, you run as a partisan, you run as a Republican, but how do you address it? And you mentioned the work you're doing with HBCUs. How do you bridge those divides to try to repair, to the extent that you can, in your individual capacity, those spiritual problems that we're dealing with?
All right, I'll take a full 2 minutes this time. I thought you want more than just, no, I'm just.
No. Look, I appreciate it.
No, let's get to the point, make the case, right? No,
point,
exactly right. I didn't, I think you got 3 questions in with Chris Christie. I don't know. Sorry, Chris, if he's checking, I don't know. But to the heart of your point, why is there, look, here's what I've determined, even spending 6 years in the United States Congress, you can't fix a spiritual issue with a political solution. Mm-hmm. You can't do it. Now, we need strong conservatives. We need people that understand policy. We need great leaders. But fundamentally, this is a spiritual battle that we're in more than anything else. And that's when I talk about the evil that we're battling, whether it's targeting our children or other areas of our life. This is why we have to be willing to engage. Not to be too cliche, but we know that the Judeo-Christian principle values that were woven in the very founding of our country, they're still etched in stone throughout D.C. I'm not going to point Nancy Pelosi where they are. She might bring a sandblaster in or something, but that's part of our fabric, and it needs to be protected. So the balance that I feel like that I have to walk as a believer is I know that God doesn't call me anywhere that I'm exempt from being a light for Christ. Yet at the same time, I have a responsibility to speak the truth. Now, that's not always pleasant to hear, and we do our best, as Paul wrote, to season it as best we can. But just as Jesus at the woman at the well, and we talked about physical needs, he did tell her the truth. That's not number 5. That's not your guy either. We got some problems here. But if you look at, though, the way that Jesus modeled that, he did it this way. Laterally, love your neighbor as yourself. My neighbors, my community, that's not my enemy. I want them to understand or have the opportunity to know what I know and love about America. But to the people that are permeating these communities, that are bringing in the damage, my job is to call them out, and to call them out by name as much as I can, to push back against that evil tide of leftist Marxist government. I'll continue to do that, and I won't be ashamed when I'm doing it.
Good. Just in a couple of minutes left, let's talk specifically about your campaign. You've got a diverse array of counties that you've got to visit. You've got a primary coming up next year. If people want to get involved, who are in the audience, who are in North Carolina, where do they go? And also, what's the landscape like? I know in Georgia, for example, or even my home state of Louisiana, there are certain things you got to go through in the process to the primary. What's it look like to run in the Republican primary?
Well, as far as what it looks like, you have a diverse group of Republicans even in our state. You have different perspectives there. I do know this, the Republican Governors Association has now designated North Carolina as the #1 gubernatorial race in the country for next year. So there's going to be a lot on the stake, a lot at stake. North Carolina, much like Georgia in some ways, is considered a purple state by some prognosticators, that you could literally not only impact the governor's race, but the right candidate or the wrong candidate could actually bring the presidential race to a percentage or point. I think the Republican won it last time just by over 1 point. President Trump did 1.5, 1.6%. So the landscape is very crucial, that you have somebody that I feel like has the strong background, the substance, to be able to not only pull those Republicans that are at 30%, but to be able to reach into different places and different communities. That's our background. We're proud of that background, and I think that's going to allow us March the 5th on Super Tuesday to be able to push through. To the second part of your question, if somebody wants to know, you can, all the social medias is Rep Mark Walker, R-E-P Mark Walker, Twitter, Facebook, social media. We have a lot of fun out there. Our website, if you want to get more detailed information, is walker4nc.com. walker4nc.com. Listen, I'm glad you could come down and hang out with me. I really am genuinely sincere when I say I admire the fact that you went into the RSC, which had become a rubber stamp for leadership, and made it conservative again, because I'd been such a big fan of the group. And best of luck to you on the campaign trail. Thank you so much, and please know that we're continuing to keep Christy in our prayers as well.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Thanks, guys.